Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event by Champaca Bookstore with Nisha Susan, the translator of Khabar by Meera, in conversation with Supriya Nair. We're thrilled to have them here today to talk about this novella, originally written in Malayalam and translated to English by Nisha. Here's a little bit about our speakers today. Nisha Susan is the author of the short story collection, The Women Who Forgot to Invent Facebook and Other Stories. She writes a lot of nonfiction about gender, culture, and the internet. The last fun thing she wrote was a long essay / tiny book called 17 Years Under Pandemic, What Watching Grey's Anatomy Taught Me. She is very grateful that her mother taught her Malayalam. Supriya Nair is a journalist from Bombay. She's the co-founder of the media company All Things Small and editor of 52.in. She was formerly a books columnist with Mumbai Mirror. Here's a little bit about the book we're discussing, Khabar. As the foundations are laid for a temple to rise on the site of Babri Masjid in Ayodhya, voices rise from the ground in a small town in central Kerala. She is a judge in a district court, and he a petitioner in a seemingly banal property dispute. But the very first hearing tosses the judge's life into disarray. The scent of pink Edward roses, the iridescent scale of snakes, the spectre and science of vanishing twins. Girls whose feet do not touch the ground. Irascible and comically powerful ancestors. In this illusory landscape are the hard truths about the intertwined histories of Hindus and Muslims in India, as well as the chasms between men and women. And here's a little bit about Champaca Bookstore. Champaca is an independent, women-run bookstore, children's library, and cafe. We bring diverse stories and perspectives for our readers and in our children's library through our books and events. We have an online store, www.champaca.in, that ships across India, where you can find all the books on our shelves and get yourself a copy of Khabar. During the event, if anyone has any questions, please do send them into the chat box, and the speakers will address them during the event. Over to you, Supriya and Nisha.
Thank you, Nirika, and thank you, Champaca. Even though this is the 18th year of the pandemic, I think it bears saying that I would much rather be in Bangalore than almost anywhere else right now, and talking to Nisha at Champaca. However, since that's not possible, thank you for hosting us online, and thank you, Nisha, for being my Saturday night date.
Your Tulsi tea. I'm going to be your Tulsi tea.
You're my Tulsi tea. I have to take a strepsil because I'm midway through. As Nisha knows, I'm midway through my quarantine for the small disappointing O. And I'm fine. I want any viewer or any and all viewers to know. But after I told you that I was going to wash my hair this morning, Nisha, I just forgot. So I think maybe this like COVID brain fog or whatever is quite real.
No, I think it's just like excessive bravery and commitment to literature.
Well, it's very difficult not to feel at least a little brave and committed to literature when the subject is someone like Meera, who I guess is the person we should be thanking most of all. And we will say many things about her and listen to many things about her, hopefully. So, Khabar for...
show many books. Many books. Many books that I have been swimming in. Okay, and it's like a swimming type feeling when you read Meera.
This is true. There is the physical sensation of reading Meera should be one of the subjects of our conversation today. Much translated Meera, for the first time translated by Nisha Susan. So for those of you who haven't read the book yet, right? It's basically a novella about this district judge who finds herself adjudicating a land dispute, as you heard in when Nirika was reading out from the book jacket. So it's a case where a guy wants to buy back a piece of land, which he says contains the grave of an ancestor. And you end up discovering quite a bit of family history. But whose family history? You will have to read the book to find out. And what happens, you will also find out what happens to this judge when she crosses paths with this mystery hottie. So we'll talk more about how that unfolds as we go. Nisha, I have a couple of questions before we kind of get into the book itself. So the books that you've been swimming in, give us an introduction to your own journey into the work of Meera as a reader.
Right. So some years ago, like maybe 8-9 years ago, I was working in Talca in Delhi, and we did a fiction issue a couple of years, like it was the last issue of the year. And while we were looking for new work to include in the fiction issue, I came across this new collection of short stories. This Yellow is the Color of Longing. This K.R. Meera's short stories, and translated by her, one of her amazing translators, J. Devika. And I just terribly excited by all the things that are happening in the short stories. And I asked her whether she would contribute something to the fiction issue. And as it happens, her contemporary classic, Hang Woman, was being published in a serialized form at that moment, right, in a Malayalam magazine. So she gave us a chunk of that. And then that led to J. Devika actually translating the whole novel eventually. So that's my first discovery of her work. And each time I read a book of hers, it is what we were talking about earlier. It is a physical sensation. Sometimes it is a book which is just redolent with the smell of death, or sometimes it is, as in this case, the smell of roses, like a deceptive smell of roses. It's very difficult to distance yourself from her books. You can only sort of plunge in and feel all the feelings, and there is irony, but it's very, very little irony. There is no, basically, there's a Malayalam saying, they say "konge pidikkuva," which is like grabbing you by the throat. That's what the books do. It's very exciting as a reader, and it's also very exciting as a writer, because she gives you a sense of how ambitious you can be with your writing, if you're not chicken. So that's really what I feel about Meera.
Yeah, you're right. It does feel like something that perhaps is most easily described by like resorting to describing a kind of physical courage, and that has something to do with with just this swimming in sensation that she puts you through in a really good way. That does shake you up. It's so interesting what you say about Meera's work not necessarily containing the kind of irony that's cool, easily written about in a newspaper review. But it does contain a lot of ambiguity. So there is like some engine at work that that is taking this book down multiple tracks, and yet somehow all of it just comes together and gives you like a core workout. Should we give our listeners a bit of a sense of what that's like?
Sure. So this section that I'm going to read is fairly early on in this book. So Bhavna is the protagonist. She's a judge, and there's a bunch of cases that she has to get through, and she has a thing that she wants to go to, which is her son's therapist appointment. And here is this case, which it's just like one other case, and except that it isn't. And here is the person that leads to all the drama in the book. So, okay, here goes. Kakasheri Khayaluddin Tangal had a good eye for clothes: a Fab India linen silk Nehru jacket, orange silk kurta, Sean Connery's body, Kamal Hassan's eyes, an unusual degree of self-confidence. The fragrance had become much sharper, and its source had now become apparent. Our eyes met. I could see that his eyes were unusually brilliant. I looked again. They seemed to be gleaming like two diamonds. They lit up his long eyelashes hypnotically. I tried to look away. I failed. His eyes became prisms. They turned the twilight into countless rainbows. My head hurt. Somehow I managed to blink and look away. Instead of looking at him, I looked at his expensive lawyer. His face was obscured by the dueling rainbows. I shifted my gaze to the defendant's lawyer. His entire head was a rainbow. I tried to read the document in my hands. Rainbows were scattered on the dark green woolen tablecloth, like Advait's multi-reference objects. I opened and closed my eyes. I shook my head. No improvement. Rainbows everywhere. The typist, the clerk, the typewriter, the calling bell, the Pune, they were all rainbows. I looked behind me. Even Gandhiji in the portrait on the wall behind me had rainbows in place of his spectacle frames. So that was a little bit of what happens
Thank
to
you.
Bhavna.
When her eyes first meet those of Kakashiri Khayaluddin Tangar, who is not the main character of the novel, because that is very much Bhavna herself.
Always,
Yeah,
So
but who's a key character.
The female protagonists drive all the action in all of her novels, in Meera's novels. The male characters are almost always beautiful, as in they're almost always good looking. There's always like sex appeal. There's all sorts of like things happening. The women are like fighting the sex appeal.
Right.
There is a like a dance movement which is generally like what I think about when I think about the relationship between the men and women. It is like this is the general feeling, okay, because they just like, they're like, oh, why do I feel this way about you? Yeah, so that's a pattern in all her books.
I find that incredibly appealing, and I'm not sure why. It doesn't feel right to say, oh, this feels very realistic or whatever, because again, as I think something we'll keep returning to is, I mean, even if it is convincing, it's not great because it's realistic. It's just great because it feels right.
It's true. And realism is not something, that's like in any way that Meera is interested in at all. Like wild things happen from page to page in every book of hers. And, realism is just too boring.
Yeah. And she is an astonishingly lucid writer. And, of course, all credit to her translators as well, who bring that to the page for us in English. But I think that is why, whenever I see her writing described as magic realism, like my first reaction is to be weirdly defensive, which is not to say there's anything wrong with magic realism, which has won many awards. And of course, metaphysical things do happen in her work, right? Gandhiji's eyes shooting rainbows. Yes, you see why this sounds like something that might easily be described as magic realism. I just wish there was a more like precise way of describing the originality of what she does.
Yeah. So I feel like the main characters are always in a hallucinatory state in all her books. There is always a thing, like if you read Unseeing Idol of Light, one of the characters is always seeing bats, and the other one is always looking for ways to commit suicide. And there is a lost wife who disappeared from a train. And there is that sense of not magic or realism, but this permanent sense of unreliability, like permanent, like the world is unreliable, I am unreliable, like please reader, try to figure out what is going on because I'm not going to help you. That thing is in all her books.
And I think maybe that also contributes to, again, how visceral this ends up being, because she's great at conveying those states of conveying those states with fantastic clarity, without what I think is, like award-winning male magical realism, the refuge of that kind of writing, without taking refuge in like broad stroke humor, or as we discussed previously, like capital I irony, right?
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that she's able to like just leap over. And I also think she resists other kinds of labeling. Like, as much as I appreciate that, the book jacket opens with a reminder of the dispute over the land, the Babri Masjid land in Ayodhya. I do think that readers should know that that's not the first thing that you end up thinking about, and not even the second or third, or maybe the last thing that you think about. Which is to say that Meera's work, including Khabar, has a way of being intensely political, but also defiant of like being about things, right?
Yeah,
Nisha, is that
yeah.
true of all her work?
Yeah, I would say so. Like, okay, so one of
Yeah,
her
she's not transferring her thinking about like
no,
topics on the
no, it's
page, you
not
know?
topics. It's just, it's really something, man. I mean, it's really something not to be shoved into the topics department. It's just like if you try to write a blurb for her book, no, that's when you realize the topics department is just not happening with her. Like, for instance, one of her most, like, I think super disturbing novella is this book called I mean, in English it's called "And Slowly Forgetting That Tree." So I mean, actually the blurb is kind of fantastic. Once on the way to town, Achan left Radhika on the wayside. He forgot her. She was 10 years old then. He left her in a small shed where the signboard said, "Urinating here is strictly prohibited. Have to piss, will be back soon," he said. Then off he went to a nearby bar. When he had downed some hard stuff, Achan remembered the local prostitute, very famous in those parts. He forgot Radhika. So, like, Radhika is raped on page 1. She's 10 years old. And then, other things happen to her. She grows up, she becomes a lawyer. She has a lover who she first encounters when she is trying to do sex work to put herself through college. I mean, there's just like it's all horrible, okay, but it is also like such an incredible story about people finding love where they can, like, even if it's like a Rihanna song, in hard places, and and then of course being like destroyed for finding love in hard places also. But it nothing ever goes the way you expect it to. It's just like, and it's the thing is that I think for anybody who's like thinking about, okay, what are these books like, I feel like an easy place to go is like, think of Hilary Mantel and then like add like a giant wad of bhang, and then you're roughly in the Kiar Meera territory, which
What's a
is
Malayali
just,
equivalent of bhang?
I don't know, Charaim is not quite it, I feel, but yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. You'll
Yeah.
have to drink a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know some things are inspired by events, but it, like as in the case of Khabar, but it departs so much from there that I keep coming back to Meera's courage in literary ambition. It's really very, I mean, there are many other Malayali writers that I like, and some of them very, very, very cool. And I just continue to feel, this is probably a very bad thing to say, I continue to feel like she's the best because she's the most ambitious and most, it's the most intricate work that I read without it sort of saying, "Look at me, I'm so intricate. Look at me, look at me." It's, I mean, I am as,
the look at me quality is completely absent.
yeah.
For anyone who thinks, by the way, that I've grown a second head over my shoulder, that's just my dad. He's chilling in the same room, not really paying attention to us. Forgive us for that. He's my good angel, and he's very silent, as you can see. The look at me quality is completely absent in a way that that feels very rare. I mean, or am I just being very prejudiced to like, particularly to men who write very long books?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, is it prejudice when it's real? Is it paranoia when it's true?
Great questions. One of the things I love about Khabar is, in fact, its concession. I mean, at some point, I think in the last 10 years of writing about books and occasionally reading them, I figured that that the ability. I don't know. I don't know what you got your college degree in, Nisha, but mine was in English
Not
literature.
literature. Not literature.
Right. So in English departments, this is basically what they teach you. They teach you how to talk about books that you have not read. Like the number of things I can tell you about Finnegan's Wake, for example, Legion, right? Which is also true of many other people. Sorry, but but to come back to my small two-line ode to the concision of and the power that's contained in just how briefly and quickly Khabar moves. Again, maybe this is something that contributes to the to that dizzy feeling because so much happens.
She wrote it in 2 weeks. Okay, she wrote it in 2 weeks. Look, I mean, I just want to add some like things here. So,
Yeah, please.
she usually writes one book a year. Usually, I mean, that's her like go-to.
Pace.
It's critically acclaimed, won every award, but also madly read in Canada. Okay, so this book, which came out in 2020 September, right? September or October 2020, I think is like it's sold 30,000 copies, right? And I have seen the messages from readers when there was like briefly there was one moment when copies were not available where they were like sending this bleating messages to Meera saying, Chechi, when will the copy come? I have not got mine. Okay, I mean, I have like screenshots. It's just like riotous. Okay, so that's her readership. And I mean, she's not the only one who has that kind of readership in like that fandom in Kerala, but it is a fully engaged readership, right? It is the kind of readership which would be like, where is this year's K.R. Meera book? And the answer to that is that she's madly writing it right now, right? So yeah, there is a kind of I don't know. I think there's a kind of agreement not to take the reader for granted, which also comes from her background in journalism. She's written screenplays. She's done stuff in TV. She gives political speeches. Like in the middle of the pandemic, I'm like calling Meera and saying, "Where are you?" She's like, "I'm off because it's the assembly elections and I need to like give a little like speech at something." So there is this like full thing going on, which is of addressing all kinds of different audiences. And while she is really an artist in the full sense of the word, she is an artist who has great awareness of audience. So if she doesn't have to write one extra page, she won't. This is my understanding. And
that's a great that's a great window into kind of all the things that go into her particular kind of artistry. So did it take you longer to translate the book than it took her to write it?
No, I mean, yes, of course. I mean, she wrote it in 2 weeks, I know, and it would have been finished because she writes it like this. Like she has this thing that like a phrase that she uses of like a catching the wave kind of thing, and then she catches the wave and then she's off. It took me a little longer. It took me about a month to get to first draft, and then like various tweaks. And I came back to the draft like 5-6 months later, and there was gigantic blooper on page 1, like clunker. Okay, so those kind of things had to be fixed. The editors had to look at it. Meera had to look at it. She has full control over prose, so she will be like, if you want this last sentence in the last page to say this, then you must remember page, 20 has this, so it needs to resonate. I mean, these are the kind of like WhatsApp messages I would get, and I'd be like, I am going to just lie down now, But yeah, it's also the nature of her writing that it's something that I found easy to translate. Like I read Nisha and Mustache side by side,
Right.
The translation and the original side by side, and like
right. This is the novel by Harish that was translated by Jayashree Kalathil into English.
I mean, holy cow, right? Like I wouldn't be able to do that. It's just the the references,
right, like Jayashree
length of
basically had to
sentences.
invent a new kind of English, I suppose, to show that Harish was working with a very, very specific kind of Malayalam in Nisha, right?
Yeah, and also like tonally, he's very specific. He has this sort of sly undercurrent thing going in his thing, and I mean, I would have like failed, I feel, but I feel it's like also like finding the song that you can sing, like and I felt like in some moment of madness that I could translate Meera, that I feel like, okay, this is
Yeah.
a song that I can sing.
So you're answering my question, which was going to be, आप translator कैसे बने, or how did you become a translator? But I feel like I need a little more backstory than this, Nisha. So tell us a little bit about your own life as a Malayalam reader, and then like kind of arriving at this particular intersection of reading, writing, publishing.
Right. So I grew up reading Malayalam and English at the same time. Like I was taught Malayalam and
Not because you
Italian.
studied it in school, but because your mother taught it to you.
Yeah, because my mother taught it to me. So I didn't go to school till I was in class 1, for the usual reasons of being between countries where my parents had jobs. So there was no school. So my mother taught me Malayalam and she taught me English both. And I was kept occupied in all of these locations by whatever reading material that was available. There was a lot of Malayalam children's magazines, which from all the Malayalam newspapers had Malayalam magazines. So I got them every week, and that is what I read. And so, and in my house, it was expected that you read Malayalam. So I read it. I feel like the translator thing, honestly, it's a bit of a twist in my life. I didn't quite see it coming. And it's
right.
mostly,
You just published your own first work of fiction a year earlier, right?
Yes. So my book came out in August 2020 and Khabar came out September 2020. And then Meera said, this is the no, I mean the Malayalam one came out in September 2020, a month after mine.
Sorry,
so,
yes.
Yeah. So I thought to myself that maybe this is something I could try, because Meera and I had talked earlier about translation, and she had thought of another book that I could try, but basically because I was very, very behind my deadlines, unlike Meera, I was like, please let me hand over something to my publisher before they like kick me. So I handed it over, and then I felt like, okay, now, like I have proved that I'm not a total wastrel in life. So I said, yes, okay, let's try it. And it's like the moment I read it, it just felt like, okay, I could do this. It's just thrilling. And multiple readings did not, like, it didn't make the thrill go away.
I feel like it probably, my sense from outside of, your endeavor is that it probably took quite a lot of courage to see yourself as someone who translates, especially because you're not surrounded by the relative comfort of, for example, academia, or you're not translating something important that was written many centuries ago.
Right. I mean, the possibility of Meera's fans like egging my house, correct, right? But so the possibility of Meera's
there's
fans
one of that, and the fact that I'm also keen to hear about your own, relationship with her, reader to writer, translator to writer, writer to writer, and like you're engaging with like a piece of a friend's heart, right? In one way.
Yeah. So, I mean, mostly I just was like, I shouldn't fuck up, I should just try to like get it right.
Yeah.
That's my baseline. And the other was the extremely surprising amount of ambition that my mother suddenly displayed in my life. Now, I have to explain, my mother has like, mostly her role in my life was like, like to leave me alone in a good way, right? And just like do your stuff. But there have been 2 points in which there have been like interventions, like key interventions. One was, I think, when I was 24 and I had got a gig writing radio plays, and my mom was visiting from out of town, and I just wanted to hang out with her. And so I was not doing my work, and I was just hanging out on the balcony. And there was one moment when she turned to me and she said, what I think of as the counter thesis to Women Writing in India, Volume 1 and Volume 2, both. Like, she turned to me and said, Poi eldadi, she said, okay, which is go write. And I was like, shit, okay, I'll go now and write my sad little radio plays. So that's like one. And the other is that when I write excessively sexual stuff, she's very careful not to read any of it so that she doesn't have to like throw a bucket of water on me. So these are usually her interventions, and I appreciate them a lot. But the moment that something of the translation, Meera, glamour, like scene appeared, it was as if like Mani Ratnam had asked me to become heroine in movie. Okay? My mother's whole approach to me was like, why aren't you doing this? And you can do this, and you must do this. And I was just like, yeah, I'm doing it. I mean, just like calm down, So, and so basically what I'm saying is, one is that I didn't want to like get egged because, Meera's fandom. And the other is that for the first time in my life, my mother had like expectations of me, and I was just like, I should just like try to make this work. So these
I should attempt to meet them.
Yeah, strictly non-literary like benchmarks for translating.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like having non-literary benchmarks for translation, I mean, it sounds like a great way to just translate more stuff. So that's really good. Now I'm just gossiping. Did you have chats with the great J. Devika as well while you were embarking on this?
No, I wouldn't have the guts. I mean, see, like I'm like talking about Meera like she's like my whatever pal, and I know so much. But I'm very like careful with like deities. Like deities must not be disturbed.
Correct.
So Meera, J. Devika, all of these are deities. I carefully compose emails, check my spellings, check grammar, and send mails. I mean, I correspond with J. Devika once a year about something, and it's usually about something she's written and I read, and that's about it. When, like I said, I was reading Nisha back, both Malayalam and English or other books. I mean, I did try to read and get a sense of how people do it, but mostly like I did that like outside of this translation. For this just translation, I just sat with this text and went at it. And, I did things like I used a dictionary, and I called a lawyer friend who said, let me check these lawyer type words to make sure that these are the kind of words that are used in Kerala courtrooms and not, my imagination of Agatha Christie courtrooms. So, right. So those kind of things, which were very dabba type things I did. But the others, I think, I mean, like Devka's translations and stuff, I just read for the feel of it, like mostly. I don't feel like one can get that rhythm, it's so idiosyncratic, right? How you respond to a sentence. Like I've been thinking a lot about this.
I can imagine not having translated, but I think I understand where you might be coming from. Yeah. Malayalam is very lucky to have a bunch of really cool women translators bringing work out, and for you to have joined them, I think is very, very cool. Give us an example of the challenge of translation. I mean, the one I want to know about is like, what word did you substitute with the English word haughty?
I knew that one was coming. It's chullan. It's chullan. Okay.
Oh,
I mean,
I've never heard that.
I know, right? I mean, so you said something when you were, I think, maybe in the podcast with Dipanjana or like an Instagram live or something with Dipanjana Pal. I think you were talking about Nisha and Mustache, and you were saying this is not the kind of translation work that you can do if you're a Malayalam Manorama girl, reading it in Kochi. And and I was just like, oh my god, this is so true. And I am like not sitting in Kochi, but like this is just basically me, right? And that moment of like I must clutch my dictionary was very, very high. But Chulan I really like, because it just immediately brings us
Right.
into a world of hotties.
Yeah. I've never heard it, but the minute you said it, I knew what I would translate it as in my head.
What
Or
is it?
rather, I knew what meaning it would convey
What would
when the
it
minute
be?
you said it. No, now that you said hottie, I can't
No,
think of a
that's
substitute. But you said
superimposes.
chula. The visual that I get of like a scorcher is definitely there.
Yeah.
I would think of like a sexy fast bowler, for example, just like speeding along speeding along his run up. So that's okay. That's that's extremely useful. I love. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the characters in the book, just for hopefully to entice more readers who haven't read the book to pick it up sooner rather than later. Um, I I said earlier that you you know the book starts with this guy coming into Bhavna's court with a family dispute, and it is to some extent about that family dispute, but not really. And the family that you do end up learning a lot about is Bhavna's, and one just the sheer
mother.
wonder and joy of meeting Bhavna's parents, both of them. The mother is great, and I immediately thought of her when you were talking about your own mother. But Bhavna writing about the father was like a mini masterpiece within a mini masterpiece. And Nisha, it also reminded me of your writing about the very delicately particular Malayali man. I didn't want to turn this conversation into a discourse on Malayali manhood or womanhood, but now that we are
Yeah,
trapped
there.
by our social locations, why not? Would you like to introduce the parents or say a little bit about your own reaction to them, uh, um,
Yeah.
please?
So it's funny also, because I was thinking of if you're online, if you're on Twitter right now, there's one of the funniest things that's happening online right now is hashtag marriage strike. Okay, it's really like the most comical thing I've ever seen. So hashtag marriage strike is in response to the discussion of a thin possibility of getting marital rape criminalized, right? And there's like sort of elaborate legal debates and the very, 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 very slim possibility of it becoming real. But in the meanwhile, men all over India have like lost their collective minds and have a subset of those have started saying, in response to the fact that we may not rape our wives, we have decided never to get married. Okay. Now, I mean, Lysistrata is a very dumb play in its own way, right? But but I mean, I really wish like Aristophanes was here for this moment of marriage strike. I mean, it's just like so great. Like dudes, don't get married. It's cool. So there is this thing in where Bhavna meets both her parents separately. They are retired people. She meets them separately because they live separately, because they've split up, and they've split up because the mother realizes that she wants her own place. Basically, she's like, I want a room of my own, in so many words. And it's because she brings home an injured dog one day on the way back from work, and her husband throws a fit, and she's like, if I cannot bring home a dog that is injured, who I think of as like a sweet companion on my last walk home from work, then forget it. I mean, I want to split from this man. And meanwhile, when Bhavna goes to meet the father, he's like clutching his remote and watching like some really trashy legal drama, and he's like a child almost. Like, it's very hard to tell who is a child in that movie. I mean, in that scene between Bhavna's actual child and her actual father, who is like more like concerned about TV shutting down. And this so I think the huge, like, Grand Canyon type divide between men and women's expectations of traditional relationships, it's something that Meera does over and over and over again. And it's so stark and so sometimes feels just like too much. You just can't take it. But then you turn around and, it's, I don't want to use the word realistic, but it's real, like that, like almost insurmountable gap between men and women and their expectations is, I mean, it's, you can see it in every book, but in this book, in Bhavna's retired parents and their sensibilities, like the mother who's reading The Vegetarian, translated into Malayalam, okay, and like such a throwaway touch, and the mother who responds to Bhavna's appointment promotion with the EMS court, and never forget
who's
about
active
EMS.
in the party.
Yeah, active in the party and knows things and whatever. And the father who's like plunging into TV land and background music.
Yeah.
It's
what a fantastic portrait of a certain kind of overlong marriage, right? Of some kind of overlong Malayali marriage.
Overlong marriage is like a book waiting to be written. Overlong marriage.
But maybe everyone who's been married beyond a certain point feels like that. I wouldn't know. I'm avoiding. I'm avoiding, as they say. As the boys who have gone on marriage strike will say, there's almost something pure about it. If it were not for the fact that it would be so hideous. I mean, I remember once I wasn't thrown out of the theater for it. I'd taken my mother to see a movie, and they showed the trailer for like that movie Bareli Ki Barfi, where I think one of the hit lines in that movie, which turned up in the trailer, was one boy telling the other that I'll say it in English since this is like a Bangalorean event. He said, "Oh, if there was no arranged marriage, then half the boys in India would be unmarried." And I laughed so loudly that like the security guard turned to look at me, but then he also smiled because he was like, "You know what? It's the truth."
It actually leads to the best line on Marriage Strike that I've seen. Somebody on Twitter said, and doesn't matter, I have to just do it in Hindi now. Incel se na ho paega. Incel se na ho paega. And I laughed for like 10 whole minutes after I read it.
Right. And you had a great column on this. I mean, of course, I don't want to ascribe too much meaning to the fact that here we are, two Malayalis talking about a book in Malayalam. In the same week that Malayali womanhood has been in the spotlight and even received national headlines thanks to a High Court judgment in Kerala that will live in infamy and notoriety, acquitting a very powerful bishop of a very serious rape charge leveled against him by a nun. For those of you who don't know, and also for posterity, since this will probably live on YouTube until 2089.
When the pandemic will finally fade.
When the pandemic will finally end. You had a very good column that took off from marriage strike and attitudes to rape and just which are basically located in the fact that all our laws, and I think Bhavna, the protagonist of Khabar, knows this as well as anyone else, all our laws essentially are meant to protect property and property owners. And so when the law makes a gesture at protecting the rights of a woman, it feels unnatural to many men, including the men on marriage strike, because women are property. Which is why someone, when I retweeted your column, someone very nicely and eloquently responded, saying, responded to someone who said, "Oh, this law can be misused," of course, by saying all laws will be, can be misused. So are you saying we shouldn't have laws against burglary and stuff like that? But no one will ever say that. No, because burglary is like a law against burglary is to protect your property. So that's
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that is the
that
conflict that people are not able to resolve.
And that preoccupation, no, it sort of appears in a lot of her books. This thing about what does the law actually mean, like who does it have emotional resonance for, when you seek justice, like what does that mean? It keeps coming back. Like in one of my, like Meera's opening lines are just like sensational always, like they're so good. And so one of my favorite opening lines is from this book called Supriya Nair, which is the woman who wore the sun. So I'll just read it in Malayalam.
Please.
And anybody who makes fun of my accent, I will come for you. Okay, so ഭർത്താവിനെ കൊല്ലപ്പെടുത്താൻ വാടക ഗുണ്ടയ്ക്ക് പണം കൊടുത്തവൾ എന്ന് കല്ലെറിയപ്പെട്ട് കുടുംബ കോടതിയിൽ നിൽക്കെ ജെസബലിന് വെളിപ്പെടുത്ത ക്രൂര പീഡാനുഭവങ്ങൾ മറികടക്കാൻ സ്വയം ക്രിസ്തുവായി സങ്കൽപ്പിച്ചാൽ മതി. Which is like Jezebel is standing in family court accused of trying to have her husband bumped off, and it's like divorce court, it's not criminal court, but she's accused of this. And she has this revelation, this epiphany, that the way to deal with the proceedings in court is to imagine herself as Jesus. Okay, and that's and I thought of this so many times during this last week. Like where do you find the ability to get through one of Kerala's favorite weapons, which is shame? Just like shame. It's like
Nanam.
It's a big thing. My God.
Yeah. It's maybe one of the, I mean, I suppose it's easy for us to talk about this given our experiences. Again, the starkness of like this gender divide, to put it very simply, and the way it comes up in Meera's novels is perhaps unique and intense because the struggle that she is writing about is unique and intense, and she lives that, right? I mean, among the many other things Meera does is she is or used to maintain an active social media presence in like Malayalam, in the world of Malayalam social media, where she is frequently bothered by the Malayali male internet. Isn't that right?
It's true, but she's like, I mean, she's like in some sense like her heroines also, which is like not a two-dimensional poster girl who's unafraid or like that like nail polish ad type, fearless, like, kick-ass. There's none
Stay
of those
free.
words.
Yeah.
None of those words. She is troubled and angered and fed up and laughing also and all of those things, but just at it, and that's the sense you get from the female protagonists also. They're just at it, They just like, sneeze please, Supriya, sneeze.
I did. Thanks. Sorry.
We will forget literature for 3 seconds. So,
no, we've moved from talking about literature to Facebook now.
yeah, fully, which is where literature is anyway, like in all
That's
our
right, which is where it all ends up. What was the Malayalam response to Khabar? Can you tell us?
It's like a roaring bestseller of the kind that us sad people who write in English will never see in our lives. Like, let me just say that much: 30,000 copies, like, and still printing more.
Does this open up the world of Malayalam writing to you at all? This excursion into translation?
No, I am highly incompetent. I cannot do it.
I can't let words like incompetent pass.
No.
But that
I mean, it's like a realistic description. I mean, I have no ability to do it. I mean, my relationship with language, all language, not just Malayalam, is very specific. I get a sense of the tone. I'm a greedy acquirer of vocabulary, like wherever I go. So as you know that I have been plunged into Korean drama, and so I immediately, like the rest of us, just greedily acquired Korean vocabulary.
Yeah, but so, Nisha, you do realize that one of the main draws of Korean entertainment for people like you and I is that It sounds like Malayalam.
It. Are you going to say Oppa equal to Cheta? Because I've been thinking that for like 7 months. Okay, but
Well, I mean, there is the fact that that ours and Korea seems to be like these seem to be the only two cultures where that particular transference happens.
yeah,
Where you call
I try
both your
to
big brother and your husband by the
yeah,
same
I try to
appellation,
explain this to my partner, who's like half
who's
Rajasthan,
neither
half
Malayali
Haryana.
nor Korean.
Yeah,
Yes.
who's half Rajasthan, half Haryana, and who was like ready to puke at this explanation.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I have been thinking that one of my attractions to both Korean drama and to Meera is the ability to stay with feeling, like however troublesome that feeling is, and that to stay with to stay. I mean, political incorrectness is like a really stupid way of explaining it, but just to avoid prescription in what you feel, and that sense of excessive emotional spending is, I think, what I like both about her books and about K-drama. I mean, there are other Malayali writers I like a lot, but it doesn't do the same thing. I mean, like, for instance, I'm a big fan of Paul Sakria, and he's the reason I started reading Malayalam literary fiction to begin with. And it's always heartbreaking and always funny, like super funny. They're like the funniest short stories. One of my all-time favorite short stories in the world is The End of Third-Rate Literature, Moonam Gira Sahityathinte Andyam, by Paul Sakria. It's set in Delhi. It's just delightful. But it's to read Meera is to have your womanhood in that sense, like centered, with everything that is joyful about it and everything that is tragic and unjust about it also centered in literature. And no matter how much you read, no, that's not an experience that you get a lot. There are very few writers that do that.
Yeah. No, you're so right about that, because like again, the standard conception of literature is of something that helps you make sense of chaos, right? It brings order to the disorderly. And that's true. It does do that. It does take, like Orhan Pamuk goes around giving lectures. I don't know if he still does it, probably not, over the last 89 years, about a novel being able to contain, ambiguity and things like that. But uh, but life is absurd, and there are very few writers who are able to contain that absurdity and to channel it without diminishing it, and in some sense bringing new kinds of color and verve to it. And I think some of the and K.R. Meera definitely does that. And I guess that's also what some of the best writers of Korean drama end up doing as well, right? Like, yes, okay, life is miserable. Let let me show you what that really means. Or, the law is the fiction. Let me show you how absurd it really is. History, our family histories are fictions beyond a point.
Did
So
you read
uh,
that in a Bombay court, a 6-foot snake appeared yesterday?
oh, I didn't read that, but I'm
They,
not
it
surprised.
was like like let's do a trailer for Khabar. Okay, but yeah, of course one must not be surprised, like, because leopards appear outside
That's right. Yeah.
supermarkets and
Correct. I was just going to say that this is one of the more wildlife. I mean, given like I want to say this is one of the more wildlife friendly cities in India. I'm not sure the wildlife would agree, but snakes appearing, and and it used to be quite standard when we used to have tabloids in the city. We're now reduced to just one. To have multiple headlines in a year about snakes appearing in bathrooms, in bedrooms.
right in the
Um,
loo, right? I mean, in case anybody
right.
who's watching this is wondering why we're talking about snakes suddenly in court, because in the beginning of Khabar there is a bit of a snake situation in the courtroom.
There is. Yeah. There are snakes, there are rainbows, there are ancestors, there are there are very few dead people given the title of the book, but there are dreams, and there is love, which is also a fiction. But just because it's a fiction doesn't mean that it's not true. And I think that is what you should keep in mind when you read Khabar. I will also, sorry, I've now taken up almost the whole hour. There are a couple of questions from our listeners. So let me tell you what they are, Nisha. Um, Arun G asked, when translating, did you find any areas where the lack of a reasonable equivalent for a word troubled you? That's quite an interesting question.
Yeah, there were words. I mean, but Meera said something to me fairly early on. She said, don't cheat, which is of using a Malayalam word instead. She said, just like work at finding a word.
The counterpart.
A counterpart. And then, so that's actually, honestly, Arun, the most fun part of translation. So I used to be fairly bad at math, but like after a point, I didn't understand what was going on. But at the point that I still enjoyed what was going on, which was like algebra. So I haven't gone back to algebra in a long while, but translation has sort of done that for me in that like this weird, like if you think of those old crime shows in which some people write like clues about the murder on some whiteboard and they try to piece it together. So I had that little whiteboard thing going on in my head for a few months actually after the first draft, because there were still words, like one word that I couldn't find an equivalent to. And
your own private wordle.
Yeah, my own private wordle. It was a lot of fun to do it. That was actually the most fun part of translation, just like sort of plunging into whatever language you have learned since you were a child and whatever you have read and saying, somewhere in this ocean is there something that works.
I mean, I think the critical choice of using Edward Rose instead of paneer, right? I guess it seems miraculous to me, because once I knew what an Edward Rose actually stood for, I was like, oh, how will I ever be able to convey to anyone what the sensation of this paneer actually is? But
it's also
then you are writing for readers who don't know what that is. So,
but it's also a generational thing. Like one generation knew it as Edward Rose, right? So when I read it in the book, I mean, it never occurred to me to even translate it, because like in my head, that's the only way I've known it, because my grandmother grew them. So like so it's like Chullan is like and actually I should test it on my mom and see whether she knows Chullan. But it's each piece of vocabulary also has its own little Gen Z, Gen X thing going.
Right. Arun was also curious about, related to language, according to my understanding, in each part of Kerala, Malayalam has a different accent. It's true, there are variations in dialect. In which part of Malayalam does Meera write? Or rather, does it owe anything to a local?
No, I mean, it's fairly like standard issue Central Travancore in that sense. But depending on the universe that she is in, there is a ridiculous amount of knowledge about words that are used. So if it's say Jezebel, it's not about using just like one word or two words to create a feeling. It is a sort of entering of a universe in which like you will use Christian imagery because these are the people that we are talking about. But you'll also use medical imagery because the main protagonist is, spends all her time in hospital and is looking at dead bodies. Or if you're writing Khabar, she knows that looking for the direction in which Makkah is not like east-west. Like it's not like a compass direction. You have a completely different way of measuring. So she knows that. And that stuff is just there in the book. So it is, I mean, localized in terms of community and where and all of that, but it isn't about just using some cute keywords and, you know, just like evoking that moment.
It's
but
not like saying, oh, what are you doing, man, which is what
No.
people do for like Bandra Christians or whatever.
No.
Very, very good to know. We have crossed the hour mark. So Nirika, if you are still here, I would like to hand this back over to you. I'm extremely happy to have been able to do this. Thank you.
Can I please thank you hugely, Supriya, for doing this in the middle of
No,
sickness
not even
and
slightly, because I
coughing?
had a great time. So thank yous are going in one direction only.
Thank you both so much. That was such a lovely conversation. To everyone watching, you can get your copy on our website, champaca.in. And we hope to see Supriya and Nisha. I hope to see you both in our store someday soon. And
Yes.
whoever's watching, you as well.
See you all. I'll be out of quarantine very soon. Bye. Take care.
Brett. Bye.